They say the most dangerous predators are the ones who smile while they hunt. Charles Williams had that smile. Perfect teeth, designer suit, the kind of confidence that makes you forget to ask questions. When he leaned in at my cousin's wedding and whispered, "Pretend you're with me," I thought I was being rescued. I was wrong. He wasn't saving me from embarrassment. He was selecting me. Like a hunter choosing the weakest deer in the herd. The one sitting alone, nursing cheap wine, avoiding eye contact with relatives who whispered about my situation. See, Charles needed someone invisible. Someone grateful. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions when luxury cars showed up at midnight or when business calls happened in languages I didn't recognize. What he didn't know was that invisible people see everything. We watch from the corners, forgotten but observing. And when you're used to being overlooked, you become very, very good at uncovering secrets. Charles thought he'd found the perfect pawn. But pawns can become queens. And I was about to turn his own game against him. This is the story of how I discovered that my Prince Charming was actually a predator, and how I made him pay for choosing the wrong woman to manipulate. But it started with a whisper at a wedding, and me being foolish enough to believe in fairy tales. Before we dive in, I'd like to know, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. And if you're new here, welcome to Revenge with Nick, the channel where betrayal gets exposed and justice always wins. Hit that subscribe button and please ring the notification bell. The Riverside Country Club was the kind of place where even the napkins cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks above tables draped in ivory silk. My cousin Sarah had always dreamed big, and marrying a surgeon apparently came with the reception to match. I smoothed my navy dress, 3 years old but still my nicest, and tried to disappear into the burgundy velvet chair at table 12. The singles table. The pity table. The place where they put divorced aunts, awkward cousins, and 28-year-old freelance graphic designers who couldn't afford a +1 even if they had one. "Jessica, honey, you look lovely," my Aunt Margaret cooed as she passed, her voice dripping with the kind of sympathy reserved for car accidents and terminal diagnoses. "Are you seeing anyone special?" "Just focusing on work right now," I replied, the lie as practiced as breathing. The truth was Messier, 6 months out of a relationship that had ended when I found David in our bed with his yoga instructor. The same month my biggest client decided to go with a larger firm. The same week my landlord raised my rent. Margaret's smile tightened. "Well, I'm sure the right man will come along. You just have to put yourself out there more." I nodded and took another sip of wine, watching her glide away to deliver the same backhanded comfort to someone else. Around me, couples swayed on the dance floor, lost in their own little worlds of promises and possibility. That's when I noticed him. He stood near the bar, tall and commanding in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car. Dark hair swept back, sharp jawline, the kind of presence that made other men stand a little straighter when he passed. I'd seen him during the ceremony, sitting in the front row on the bride's side. Someone important, judging by how the groomsmen had fallen over themselves to shake his hand. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and something flickered in his gaze. Not interest, exactly. More like recognition. As if he'd been studying me without my realizing it. He started walking toward me, and I felt my cheeks flush. Men like that didn't approach women like me. They dated models and heiresses, not struggling freelancers with clearance rack dresses and student loan debt. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "Are you Jessica Smith?" I blinked. "Do we know each other?" He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made you forget your own name. "Charles Williams. I've heard Sarah mention you, her brilliant artist cousin. May I?" He gestured to the empty chair beside me, and I nodded, trying to process how Sarah's surgeon husband would know someone who moved like he owned every room he entered. Charles settled into the chair with fluid grace, his cologne a subtle mix of sandalwood and something expensive I couldn't place. Up close, I could see the fine lines around his gray eyes, the callus on his ring finger where a wedding band had once been. "I have to ask," he said, leaning slightly closer, "why is someone as beautiful as you sitting alone at a wedding?" The compliment should have made me blush and stammer. Instead, Something cold settled in my stomach. It was too smooth, too practiced. Like he'd used the same line before. Maybe I prefer my own company, I said, surprising myself with the edge in my voice. His smile widened, and for a moment, I saw something sharp flicker behind his eyes. Approval? Amusement? A woman with backbone. I respect that. The music shifted to something slow and romantic, and couples began pairing off on the dance floor. From across the room, I caught sight of my cousin Rachel whispering to her husband, both of them glancing in my direction with poorly concealed pity. Charles followed my gaze and seemed to understand immediately. Family events can be brutal when you're flying solo, he murmured. All those concerned looks and well-meaning questions about your love life. You sound like you speak from experience. Divorced 3 years ago, he said simply. Amazing how quickly you become a project for every married woman in the room. I laughed despite myself, recognizing the truth in his words. The I have someone perfect for you brigade. Exactly. He paused, studying my face with an intensity that made my skin tingle. Which is why I have a proposition for you. Before I could ask what he meant, he stood and extended his hand. Dance with me. I'm not really. Trust me, he said, and something in his voice made the words sound less like a request and more like a command. Just for one song. Help me avoid the well-meaning matchmakers, and I'll return the favor. I hesitated, glancing around the room. Rachel was still watching, probably composing the text she'd sent to my mother about poor Jessica sitting alone again. My Aunt Margaret had moved on to interrogating a cousin about her biological clock. Why not, I said, taking his hand. His fingers were warm and firm, calloused in a way that suggested he did more than sit behind a desk all day. He led me to the dance floor with the confidence of someone who'd never been refused, never been second-guessed. The music wrapped around us as he pulled me close, one hand settling at the small of my back, the other cradling my fingers against his chest. He moved with practiced ease, guiding me through steps I half remembered from high school dance classes. Better, he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. I glanced around and realized he was right. The pitying stares had shifted to curious whispers. Instead of poor Jessica, they were asking, who's that handsome man with Sarah's cousin? Much, I admitted. Good. Now tell me something real about yourself, Jessica. Not the polite small talk version, something true. The request caught me off guard. In my experience, men like Charles preferred surface-level conversations. Safe topics that didn't require genuine connection. I'm terrified I'm wasting my life, I said before I could stop myself. I'm almost 30, living paycheck to paycheck, and sometimes I lie awake wondering if this is all there is. He was quiet for a moment, and I immediately regretted the honesty. Too much, too soon. I'd scared him off before the song even ended. I started my first business when I was 19, he said finally. Flipped it for $2 million by 25. Built an empire by 35. And you know what I discovered? What? Success without someone to share it with is just expensive loneliness. His gray eyes met mine, and for a moment, the polished facade cracked, revealing something raw underneath. Money can't buy connection, Jessica. But authentic people? They're rarer than diamonds. The song ended, but neither of us moved to separate. Around us, other couples shifted and changed partners, but Charles kept his arms around me, his gaze intense and searching. Can I ask you something? I said. Anything. Earlier, when you walked over, it felt like you'd been watching me. Like you'd already decided to approach. Was I imagining that? For just a second, his grip on my waist tightened. Then that charming smile returned, and he chuckled softly. You caught me, he said. I noticed you during the ceremony. You were in the third row, not crying during the vows like everyone else. Just observing. Like you were filing away details for a story you might tell later. That's a very specific observation. I pay attention to details. It served me well in business. He paused, studying my face. Would you like to get some air? It's getting warm in here. I nodded, letting him guide me toward the French doors that opened onto a stone terrace overlooking the golf course. The October air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. Better, he asked, leaning against the stone railing. Much. I joined him at the railing, surprised by how easy it felt to be in his presence. Usually, I was tongue-tied around successful, attractive men. But something about Charles made conversation flow naturally. "Can I confess something?" he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. "Sure." When I walked over tonight, it wasn't entirely altruistic. Yes, I wanted to rescue you from the pity parade. But I also wanted to rescue myself. From what? He gestured toward the ballroom, where I could see Sarah's new mother-in-law holding court with a group of society women. From being the eligible bachelor, they're all trying to auction off to their daughters and nieces. Sometimes it's easier to have a beautiful woman on your arm as armor. The honesty should have stung. Being used as social camouflage wasn't exactly flattering. But something in his tone suggested there was more to it. "And now?" I asked. "Now I'm wondering if I might have found something real instead of just convenient." He turned to face me fully, his expression serious. "Jessica, would you consider letting me take you to dinner sometime? Somewhere we can talk without an audience." My heart hammered against my ribs. Men like Charles Williams didn't ask women like me to dinner. This was the kind of moment that happened in movies, not in real life. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. He smiled, and this time it seemed genuine rather than practiced. "Excellent. I'll call you tomorrow to arrange the details." "You don't have my number. Sarah mentioned you're freelancing. I'm sure I can track down your business contact information." He paused, tilting his head. "Unless you'd prefer to give it to me directly?" I pulled out my phone and we exchanged numbers. His fingers brushed mine as he handed back my device, sending an unexpected jolt of electricity up my arm. "Charles," I said as he prepared to escort me back inside, "can I ask you one more thing?" "Of course. What do you do?" "For work, I mean." "You mentioned business, but—" That sharp look flickered across his features again, so quickly I almost missed it. "Import and export. Rather boring, actually. I help companies navigate international markets, streamline their supply chains. Not nearly as interesting as graphic design. You'd be surprised how boring graphic design can be. Somehow I doubt that. Creative minds are never truly boring, Jessica. They're just misunderstood by people who lack imagination." As we walked back into the warmth and light of the reception, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Maybe my string of bad luck was finally breaking. Maybe sometimes fairy tales did happen to regular people. I didn't notice the way Charles's eyes swept the room before we entered, cataloging faces and exits with military precision. I didn't catch the subtle nod he exchanged with a man in a navy suit near the bar, or the way his phone buzzed with a text that made him smile in a way that never reached his eyes. All I saw was a handsome, successful man who'd chosen me out of a room full of options. Who'd made me feel seen and valued instead of pitied. I should have paid attention to the details that seemed off. The way he'd known my name before asking. How quickly he'd sized up my insecurities and offered exactly the right words to soothe them. The practiced ease with which he'd maneuvered me away from the crowd. But I was 28 and lonely and tired of being overlooked. So when Charles whispered, "Pretend you're with me," I thought I was being rescued. I didn't realize I was being recruited. The first red flag came disguised as the most romantic thing that had ever happened to me. Charles Williams, calling for Jessica Smith, my phone announced 3 days after the wedding. I'd been hunched over my laptop in my studio apartment, surviving on instant coffee and the false hope that my latest client might actually pay their invoice on time. "This is Jessica. Good morning, beautiful. I hope you're free Friday evening. I have reservations at Le Bernardin at 8. Le Bernardin. The Le Bernardin. The Michelin-starred temple of fine dining that required reservations 3 months in advance and cost more for one meal than I usually spent on food in a month. "Charles, that's incredibly generous, but I'm not sure I can. Accept a dinner invitation from a man who can't stop thinking about you." His laugh was warm, confident. "Jessica, money is just a tool. What's the point of having it if you can't use it to spend time with someone extraordinary?" Someone extraordinary. When was the last time anyone had called me that? David had preferred words like practical and low maintenance, usually delivered in the tone you'd use to describe a reliable sedan. "I don't have anything appropriate to wear to a place like that," I admitted, immediately hating how small my voice sounded. Then we'll fix that. What's your dress size? Charles, no. I can't let you buy me clothes. You're not letting me do anything. I'm choosing to do something nice for someone I care about. There's a difference. He paused, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Unless you'd prefer to cancel? I'd understand if a second date feels too fast. A second date. He was calling our dinner a second date, which meant dancing with me at the wedding had been our first. The thought made something warm unfurl in my chest. 8 or 10, he asked gently. What? Dress size, Jessica. 8 or 10. 8, I whispered, already knowing I was crossing a line I'd never crossed before. Perfect. The dress will be delivered tomorrow afternoon. And Jessica? Wear your hair down. I've been thinking about how beautiful it looked at the wedding. He hung up before I could protest further, leaving me staring at my phone in a mixture of terror and excitement. I'd never been the kind of woman men bought dresses for. I was the kind who split checks and insisted on paying her own way, partly from principle and partly from pride. But Charles Williams wasn't asking me to be practical. He was asking me to be someone extraordinary. The dress arrived in a black box tied with silver ribbon, no delivery label or store name. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a midnight blue silk sheath that felt like water against my fingers. No price tag, but when I researched the designer label, my mouth went dry. This dress cost more than my rent. I tried it on 3 times before Friday, each time marveling at how perfectly it fit, how it transformed my reflection into someone who belonged in Charles's world. The woman in the mirror had confidence in her spine and secrets in her smile. Jesus, Jess, my friend Jane breathed when she video called, and I gave her a twirl. You look like a different person. Good different or bad different? Dangerous different. Like you could break hearts and topple governments. She leaned closer to her screen. Where did he find this dress? And more importantly, what does he want in return? Maybe he just wants to take me to dinner. Nobody spends that kind of money on maybe, Jess. Men like Charles Williams don't do anything without a reason. I told myself Jane was being paranoid, that she'd been burned by too many Wall Street types during her brief stint in finance. But as I fastened the delicate clasp of the matching necklace that had been tucked into the box, I wondered what Charles Williams's reasons might be. Friday evening, a black car with tinted windows appeared outside my building at exactly 7:30. The driver, a silent man in a perfectly pressed uniform, held the door open without making eye contact. Inside, champagne chilled in a silver bucket and soft jazz played from hidden speakers. I felt like Cinderella if Cinderella had been a struggling graphic designer from Queens instead of a fairy tale princess. Charles was waiting at the restaurant, impossibly handsome in a navy suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and gray eyes. He stood when I approached, and his smile was warm enough to melt the October chill that clung to my coat. You're stunning, he said, pressing a kiss to my cheek that sent shivers down my spine. That dress was made for you. Thank you. For everything. The dress, the car, this. I gestured around the restaurant, with its hushed conversations and crystal stemware. The pleasure is entirely mine. He helped me into my chair, his fingers lingering on my shoulders. I've been looking forward to this all week. Dinner was a revelation. Charles was charming and attentive, asking thoughtful questions about my work and listening to my answers with the kind of focus that made me feel like the most interesting person in the room. He told stories about his travels, business trips to Hong Kong and Geneva, weekend getaways to places I'd only seen in magazines. What's the most beautiful place you've ever been? I asked as we shared a dessert that was more art than food. Honestly? Right here, right now. He reached across the table to brush a strand of hair from my face. Beauty isn't just about location, Jessica. It's about the company you keep. I laughed, feeling my cheeks warm. That's a very smooth line, Mr. Williams. It's not a line if it's true. His expression grew serious. Can I tell you something? I haven't felt this connected to someone in years. There's something about you that's different. Different how? Genuine. Real. Most people in my world are performing all the time, trying to be what they think others want them to be. But you. He smiled softly. You're just yourself. Do you know how rare that is? I wanted to believe him. Sitting in that beautiful restaurant, wearing a dress that cost more than my monthly income, Being courted by a man who looked at me like I was precious, it felt like stepping into someone else's life. Someone better, more deserving than struggling Jessica Smith from Queens. But Maya's words echoed in my mind. What does he want in return? Charles, I said carefully, can I ask you something? Anything. What do you see when you look at me? Really see? He was quiet for a long moment, swirling the wine in his glass. I see potential, he said finally. I see intelligence and beauty that's been overlooked by people who don't recognize quality. I see someone who deserves better than what life has given her so far. And you want to give me better? I want to show you what your life could look like with the right person in it. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. I want to take care of you, Jessica. Let me do that. The words should have made me swoon. Instead, they made my stomach clench with unease. Taking care of me, that wasn't what I wanted from a relationship. I wanted partnership, equality, someone who saw me as an equal rather than a project. But when Charles smiled and signaled for the check, when he helped me into my coat with gentle hands and promised to call me tomorrow, I pushed the unease aside. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe this was just how wealthy men expressed interest, with grand gestures and expensive gifts. Maybe I was finally getting the fairy tale I'd always told myself I didn't need. The car ride home was quiet, Charles's hand warm on mine as we glided through the city streets. When we arrived at my building, he walked me to my door like an old-fashioned gentleman. Thank you, I said as we stood in the fluorescent light of my building's lobby. For the most incredible evening I've ever had. The first of many, I hope. He tilted my chin up with gentle fingers. Jessica, I know this is fast, but I'd like to see more of you. A lot more. What does that mean? It means I want to introduce you to my world. My friends, my colleagues. I have events coming up. Gallery openings, charity galas, business dinners. I'd love to have you by my side. My heart hammered. His world. The world of private cars and designer dresses and restaurants that required reservations 3 months in advance. I don't know if I'd fit in with that crowd, I said honestly. You'd fit in perfectly. Trust me. His eyes were intense, compelling. Say yes, Jessica. Let me show you what your life could be. Standing there in my beautiful borrowed dress, looking up at this impossibly handsome man who wanted to transform my ordinary life into something extraordinary, there was only one answer I could give. Yes. He kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When he pulled away, I was breathless and dizzy and completely, utterly hooked. I'll pick you up Saturday at 7, he murmured against my ear. Wear something elegant. We're going to the Met's Young Patrons Gala. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He waited until I was safely inside before getting back into his car, but I could feel his eyes on me through the glass doors. In my apartment, I hung the dress carefully in my closet next to my collection of Target clearance finds and discount rack discoveries. It looked alien among my everyday clothes, like a piece of someone else's life that had wandered into mine by mistake. Over the next 3 weeks, Charles took me to 4 more events. Each one more lavish than the last. A wine tasting at a Soho gallery where the cheapest bottle cost more than my weekly groceries. A private screening of an independent film where I rubbed shoulders with people whose names I'd seen in magazine headlines. A charity auction for children's literacy where the starting bid on most items exceeded my monthly rent. At each event, I felt the weight of calculating stares as people tried to place me in Charles's social ecosystem. You're Charles's new girl, aren't you? Became a familiar refrain, always delivered with a smile that didn't quite reach the speaker's eyes. Charles was the perfect escort, attentive but not possessive, charming but never condescending. He introduced me as someone very special and deflected invasive questions with practiced ease. When I stumbled over the proper wine terminology or felt overwhelmed by the opulence, he was there with a steady hand and a reassuring word. But I was starting to notice things. The way his jaw tightened when certain people approached us. How he steered conversations away from specific topics about his business. The phone calls he took in other rooms, speaking in voices too low to overhear. What exactly do you import and export? I asked after the charity auction, as we sat in the back of his car heading home. Boring stuff, he said, his attention focused on his phone screen. Industrial equipment, Specialty materials. Nothing that would interest you. Try me. I'm more curious than you might think. He looked up then, studying my face in the dim light of passing street lamps. Consulting really is tedious, Jessica. Much less interesting than talking about your latest projects. The deflection was smooth, but it was still a deflection. And I was starting to realize that for all the hours we'd spent together, I knew remarkably little about Charles Williams' actual life. Jessica, my friend Jane said when I called to tell her about the latest gala, I've been doing some research on your boyfriend. What kind of research? The kind that uses Google and public records. Her voice was tense. Jess, his company barely exists online. I can find the registration and a basic website, but no client testimonials, no business partnerships, no trade publications that mention him. Maybe he's just private. Or maybe he's hiding something. When was the last time you went to his place? I thought about it. He always picks me up and drops me off. Says he's having his apartment renovated. For 3 weeks? Jessica, I think you need to be careful. Really careful. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Jane's warnings echoing in my mind. Charles had been nothing but generous and attentive. He'd made me feel beautiful, desired, special in a way I'd never experienced before. But Jane was right about one thing. I knew almost nothing concrete about his life beyond the designer suits and expensive dinners. I was still thinking about this the next morning when Charles called. Good morning, beautiful. Are you free for lunch today? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. What about? Nothing serious. Just some upcoming events I'd love to have you attend. We can talk over lunch. But when I met him at the restaurant, another upscale place I'd never heard of, Charles seemed different. More tense, more watchful. He kept glancing around the dining room as if looking for familiar faces or potential threats. Is everything all right? I asked as we were seated at a corner table. Of course. Why do you ask? You seem distracted. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Just business pressures. Nothing for you to worry about. There it was again, that dismissive reassurance that I shouldn't concern myself with his work. As if I was too delicate or too unimportant to understand whatever was troubling him. Charles, I said, setting down my menu, can I ask you something honestly? Always. What aren't you telling me about your business? The question hung between us like a challenge. Charles's expression went very still, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across his features that looked almost like fear. What makes you think I'm not telling you something? Because every time I ask a specific question about what you do, you change the subject. Because you seem to know everyone at these events, but no one seems to know exactly what your company does. Because you pay for everything in cash, and you're always looking over your shoulder like you're expecting trouble. Charles was quiet for a long moment, turning his water glass in slow circles on the white tablecloth. When he looked up, his gray eyes were unreadable. You're very observant, Jessica. It's hard not to be when you're being deliberately evasive. What if I told you that some things are better left unknown? That there are aspects of my work that could be complicated for someone in your position? My heart started beating faster. What kind of complications? The kind that involve people who don't always operate within traditional legal frameworks. The kind that could be dangerous for someone who asked too many questions. The restaurant suddenly felt very cold. Are you threatening me? I'm protecting you. He reached across the table to cover my hand with his. Jessica, there are things about my business that you don't need to understand. Things that could put you at risk if you knew too much. I pulled my hand away. Put me at risk, how? From people who might see you as a liability. People who don't make the distinction between willing participants and innocent bystanders. The words hit me like ice water. What kind of business are you really in, Charles? The kind that pays for beautiful dresses and expensive dinners and gives you access to a world you could never reach on your own. His voice had gone cold, clinical. The kind that requires discretion and loyalty from the people who benefit from it. I stared at him, this man who'd swept into my life with fairy tale promises and romantic gestures. The man who'd made me feel chosen and special and beautiful. And I realized that Jane had been right all along. You're not my boyfriend, are you? I said quietly. I'm your cover story. Charles's smile was sharp as winter. You're very smart, Jessica. Much smarter than I initially gave you credit for. So this was all fake? The dinners, the dresses, the way you looked at me. Not fake. Strategic. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with the detached interest of a scientist examining a specimen. You needed to feel special, desired, chosen. I needed a respectable woman to make me appear settled, trustworthy. We both got what we needed. Until I started asking questions. Until you started asking questions, he agreed. I felt something break inside my chest, not my heart exactly, but something deeper. The part of me that had been willing to believe that someone like Charles Williams could want someone like me for genuine reasons. What happens now? I asked. Now you have a choice. His voice was conversational, almost friendly. You can continue enjoying the benefits of our arrangement, with the understanding that curiosity is dangerous. Or what? Or you can walk away and pretend none of this ever happened. Go back to your studio apartment and your struggling freelance business and your ordinary life. The words were meant to sting, and they did. But underneath the hurt was something else, something harder and more dangerous. Anger. And if I don't choose either option? If I decide to find out exactly what kind of business you're really in? Charles's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his gray eyes. Then you'll discover that curiosity killed more than just cats, Jessica. He stood up, pulling out his wallet and placing several $100 bills on the table. Think carefully about your choice. I'd hate for our arrangement to end unpleasantly. He walked away without looking back, leaving me sitting alone in an expensive restaurant with the remains of our lunch and the smoking ruins of what I'd thought was a fairy tale romance. But as I sat there, processing the magnitude of how completely I'd been played, I realized something important. Charles Williams had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. He saw a lonely, grateful woman who'd be content with expensive dinners and designer dresses. Someone who'd be too intimidated or too dependent to dig deeper. What he didn't see was that I'd spent my entire life being underestimated, being overlooked, being dismissed as not smart enough, not important enough, not dangerous enough to worry about. And people who are used to being invisible learn how to see everything, including the cracks in carefully constructed lies. I pulled out my phone and called Jane. Jess? How did lunch go? Jane, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, I need your help. And I need you to be very, very careful about who you talk to. What's wrong? Charles isn't who he says he is. And I think I'm in serious trouble. Where are you? I'm coming to get you. As I waited for Jane, I thought about Charles's parting words. The casual threat wrapped in concern. The assumption that I'd be too scared or too grateful for his attention to push back. He was wrong. I wasn't scared. I was furious. And I was going to find out exactly what Charles Williams was hiding, even if it destroyed both of us. Because sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be anyone's pawn. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the designer dresses hanging in my closet like beautiful lies. Each one represented a moment when I'd believed I was special, chosen, worthy of someone's genuine affection. Now I knew the truth. They were costumes for a performance I hadn't known I was giving. My laptop glowed on the kitchen table, cursor blinking in the search bar. I'd been sitting there for an hour trying to decide what to type. Charles Williams. Williams International Consulting. Import-export money laundering. Jane's warnings echoed in my head, mixed with Charles's barely veiled threats. There are aspects of my work that could be dangerous for someone who asked too many questions. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed again. Choose wisely. A friend. I stared at the message, my hands trembling slightly. Charles's people, watching me, reminding me that I was in deeper than I'd realized. But as I looked around my small apartment, my real life, not the fantasy version Charles had shown me, I realized something important. This was my choice. For the first time in months, maybe years, I got to decide what happened next. I could be smart and scared and grateful, disappearing back into my ordinary life like Charles expected. Or I could be something he'd never anticipated. I could be dangerous. I opened my laptop and began to type. If you're watching this, you know exactly what it feels like to be chosen by someone who seemed too good to be true. Comment below. Have you ever ignored red flags because someone made you feel special? Hit like if you're ready to see how Jessica turns the tables on Charles, and subscribe to Revenge with Nick because part 2 is going to blow your mind. And remember, when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. Even if they're wrapped in designer suits and fairy tale promises. The real question is, what would you do in Jessica's place? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Part 2 drops tomorrow, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when Jessica decides to stop being the pawn and starts playing the game. See you there.